No. Sit down, shut, get comfortable or whatever. Who's leaving behind?
This is live.
Who's not here? Sit down, get comfortable. No desk for you. Too bad. Too bad.
There's 5,000 views.
How you feel right now? A little stressed?
No.
A little angry?
Yeah.
Hot?
Sweaty.
Sweaty? Who said anything along the lines of I'm getting tired? Several of you said something, I'm getting tired. You said ow a few times. Who wore the wrong shoes? Who wore the wrong shoes? Ansley wore the wrong shoes. Where are we? Where are we? Miss Nichols' classroom? Some classroom. Are we in our home? We're in our home classroom? Yeah, who wondered where they're supposed to sit? Probably all y'all, because this is not our home, right? Who doesn't even have a little plot of land to call their own? You. Yeah. Who fell off pace and didn't even make the full march? Yeah. Hopefully y'all got left behind. Hey, let me welcome you to our conversation today about the Trail of Tears. The Trail of Tears, when the Cherokee Indians got forced out of their homelands and had to march 800 miles, relocated to the Indian Territory. Everybody all at once now. That's what he was doing. Yes, ma'am.
Are we going to do class here?
We are going to do about half of our class here. Yeah. Hey, did you forget something? I told you to pack your things, didn't I?
Hey, what do I do about this?
So now that we kind of know what I was going for, let's talk about it through the light of the eyes of the Indians. How do you think they felt when the government came in and said you got 10 seconds to pack? Do you think that some family groups might have gotten chopped up? Yeah, in a larger class, I might have gone 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2 and split you up and had, co-teacher and myself go different directions. A little bit of a smaller group here, so we didn't do that, but you might have been divided up per your family group or your friend group. We landed in a new place, and you guys are already like, I left something behind. You think the Indian families probably left something behind? Because how do they have to carry their things?
By hand.
Yeah, on their backs. Maybe a few carts and wagons, but not many, for sure, not many. And you're in a new place. Now, we are just a couple doors down, but it's unfamiliar to you. You're a little uncomfortable. So today, we are going to be taught, and final thought, those who fell off pace, those who were unable to keep their hand onto the rope, what do you think would have happened to you? Man, that's kind of why it's called the Trail of Tears, is because there was so much death and dying, and many people got buried alongside the trail if they had a chance to get buried at all. So if you fell off pace, and I'm sorry for you, you probably wouldn't have made it on the Trail of Tears. Now, how long was our little exercise? How long was our little simulation?
10 minutes.
Yeah, like a whopping 10 minutes. These Indians marched from Georgia to Oklahoma. Upwards of 800 plus miles. You got like a quarter mile tops, right? I was marching around the school in the air conditioning at that. But these Indians, their whole families, elderly to the newborn and everyone in between, would have had to march upwards of 800 miles in the open terrain through the winter, by the way. Today, we are talking about the Indian Removal Act of 1830. And the Trail of Tears. Devin? How long did it take? Good question. Various amounts of time, but generally speaking, upwards of about 4 months to make the march. And we are going to talk how different groups traveled at different paces. It's not exactly one single trail. It wasn't a super highway. There were different branches that they followed. I'll show you a map here in just a second. Mark one. Well, that's exactly what I'm going to tell you about today. That is a great question. I hope you will keep in mind all the feelings you have. Okay, a little bit stressed. A little bit hot, I'm sweating, right? And the few minutes after we stopped walking, maybe started sweating a little bit more. If your feet were tired, if you wanted a drink break, you didn't like getting jumbled, you didn't like getting snatched out of our room. Andrea, you even left something behind. All of these emotions that you have, I hope you'll think about it in light of these Indians who got moved off their homes. And Marquand, I'm absolutely going to answer that question. So we're going to talk about the Indian Removal Act in light of Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson is president at this time. Now, I did our exercise up front, and I'm going to tell you all about the Trail of Tears when we take our bathroom break and we go back to our classroom. I'm going to tell you how Andrew Jackson got elected and kind of take a half step backwards and tell you all about Andrew Jackson. But right now, this is Andrew Jackson versus the Native Americans. Andrew Jackson took on a lot of opponents in his presidency, and given the exercise that we just did, we're going to talk about Andrew Jackson versus the Native Americans. So here's the setup. The setup is that English explorers came from the Old World to the New World, and what exactly did they discover? Answer is nothing. They didn't discover anything. Stuff was already here, right? People were already in the Americas. Now, we gave them names like Indians, because these explorers actually thought they were in India. More politically correct, they might be Native Americans, because they were native to this area. My point is, they were already here. They had always been the people group that was here. But as soon as the Europeans, and we are generally speaking, most in the room here are descendants of white Europeans, we transplaced these Indians who had always been here. We put them where we wanted them to be. Now, I know we do have a variety of heritages in this room, and I may be speaking about your person group, right? I may be speaking about your heritage, and that kind of makes us a nice blend in the room, right? To talk about some people have Anglo-European descendants. Some people are Native American. Other people and their families were brought here for a variety of reasons. That makes our class really blended. Devin? Yep. Which question? Welcome to our new home. We're very displaced. At the tip of the spear of the United States Army, we have been displaced. All right. So here's where we, the powers that be, the white Americans that were in power, placed the Indians. Generally in the South, where these yellow areas are. So Georgia and Alabama, dominant Indian reservation or Indian homelands. The Indians were put there by a variety of treaties. They were allowed to be there. It's not where they chose to settle. They didn't take that land by force. They didn't fight a war over it. It's where they were allowed to be. The white man, I'm standing here as a white man, right? I'm using that phrase. The white man put the Indians on those lands. They didn't. It wasn't like they didn't belong there. They did belong there. Well, guess what? Guess what was found on a lot of this land? Gold is exactly right. Gold and other valuable resources. So now we're going to have a conflict. We gave the Indians this land, but oh wait, it actually has a bunch of valuable resources on it. So now we, the white Americans, we want this land again. This, who was on these lands? Who was on these lands? We call them the 5 civilized tribes. And that by itself, that label by itself is a pretty racist label. They are civilized because that means that they assimilated or fell into the white man's traditions. Religion, most of these tribes adopted Christianity. Politically speaking, they had a government that was based on a written constitution. They spoke English. They even intermarried with white Europeans, so male, female, whichever, vice versa. Like there's an intermarriage from the Indian side to the European side. They ran plantations, much like many other white plantation owners did. These Indians even owned slaves. They were doing the best they could to adopt European behaviors, to fit in with these new landowners, right? Their masters in the new world. They did the best they could to fit in. And even still, it wasn't enough, because their skin color was different, because their heritage was different. There was still a lot of racism that was going on. The white man labels them civilized, as in they're not savages. They're not hunting on the plains. They are civilized. But like I said, that label itself is pretty racist because of what it required of them. Abandon your religion, adopt ours. Abandon your traditions, adopt ours. Here are the 5 civilized tribes. Pretty easy way to remember them is C, 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 and S. Now, that's not some mega vocab term. To be honest, that's not something that's going to show up on the test. But pretty easy way to remember it. Cherokee, Choctaw, Creek, Chickasha, and Seminole. Seminoles were based mostly in Florida, which is why you have the Florida State Seminoles as a college mascot. I'll tell you, I got a kind of a unique perspective myself. I'm here in Georgia. I'm teaching in Georgia. My wife's from Georgia. I live in Georgia. This is where the Trail of Tears started. Everything I'm telling you about, these Indians started in Georgia. But they traveled to, Devin got it, they traveled to Oklahoma, of course, where I grew up. So I've seen these Indian tribes flourish even amidst the adversity. I've seen them grow in Oklahoma. I've seen these Indian nations, and that's what we call them. There's Oklahoma, the state, and there's Oklahoma Territory where the law enforcement goes and where the governor has control of because he's the governor. But then there's also sovereign Indian territory. Like there's Creek Nation, there's Chickasha Nation in Oklahoma. And on these Indian tribal reservations, they have their own police force, they have their own government, they have their own laws that they enforce. So it's a really unique part of Oklahoma where portions of the land belong to the Indian tribe and not the state government. Little side note here, this is kind of interesting. It's bad that they had to make the Trail of Tears march. It's bad that people died. We're going to talk about, the adversity, the bad parts of that. But on the back side of things, the Indian tribes did make the most of it. They planted in their new home. They grew in a good way. And a unique thing that they do in Oklahoma itself, you cannot have casinos. You can't have gambling. But on the Indian lands, which is not Oklahoma, they have casinos. So there's a lot of Indian-owned casinos in Oklahoma. And what are those good for? Money. Yeah, Jasmine, question?
So does the law enforcement work together?
They do work together. There is some shared reciprocity, but there's also some really unique stuff where certain crimes that might, breaking an Oklahoma law, the Indian nation gets the first charge at that. So there are certain people where if you're on the Indian rolls, you're part of Indian bloodline, you don't get tried in an Oklahoma court, you get tried in a native court. But they do, it's not like they throw murder out the window. It's not like they throw away any of the laws. It's almost like they enforce the law on their own people first. And there's plenty of uniqueness there. I hope I'm not saying anything wrong, but I did grow up with that. I saw it happen a whole lot. Terry, do you have a question? All right, so hang with me, guys, because I'm just giving you this portion of class in this room. We will take our break. We'll return to our home. So if you're uncomfortable or you're really jumbled up because I made you go on a walk, just hang with me for about 10 minutes in here. And we're going to be done. We'll just walk back to our time. Unless you want to go on a walk, get your steps in, right? All right, a little bit more. So, President Jackson. Jackson is, he's known as an Indian fighter. He actually was a general in the military during the Indian Wars. So he has fought against the Indians before. He's kind of pre-prejudiced against the Indians because he's fought against them in battle. He wants them off these lands. He doesn't think that they're capable of fitting into the white man's society. He doesn't think that they're ever going to flourish in the same way as an American or as a European does. Obviously, that's a very racist view. He also thinks that they're taking up some pretty important land. We don't want them here on the valuable land. You know what? We got this ash and trash part of the Louisiana Purchase. We call it the Plains. It's really kind of like a barren wasteland. Let's kick them out there. Now, of course, that's modern-day Oklahoma, and I don't think it's a barren wasteland, but that was the attitude at the time. So what he does is he encourages Congress to pass the Indian Removal Act of 1830. Now, you don't need to take notes right now because I'm just telling you my story. We will get to our notes, and on the back half of class, I'll make sure that you have all the key information that you need. Jackson asks Congress to pass this act. When the president gets personally involved in a law, it's called an initiative. That means that he is personally involved in getting this law passed. Usually laws come from Congress, they make it up to the president signs it into law. Well, every now and then, and if you pay attention to the news, you've probably heard some of President Biden's initiatives. That means he's personally involved. He says, hey, Congress, you guys better work together, write this law, pass this law, because I want to sign it. That means it's an initiative. Jackson, this was one of his only initiatives. His personal investment was to get the Indians kicked off this land. So I think he's pretty racist in that perspective that he made this his mission to get the Indians kicked off this valuable farmland. Like I said, the plan was to send them to the Great Plains. Congress and a lot of people thought that this was just a barren wasteland. This, of course, is the shape of present-day Oklahoma, modern-day Oklahoma. And you can even see how they started to apportion off those lands. And to this day, this is generally where these different people groups reside. Now, of course, they could move, they could choose to work somewhere or live somewhere else. But generally speaking, this is where these various Indian groups reside because that's the land that was given to them originally. We're going to talk about the Cherokee group in particular because they were kind of the most resistant to the moving. Other groups, they almost saw the writing. It's almost like they saw the writing on the walls, the Creek, the Chickasha, the Seminole. They may not have liked the Indian Removal Act, but they saw that it was going to happen. so they just didn't resist quite as much. The Cherokee in North Georgia, so a little Georgia history too. The Cherokee in North Georgia, they resisted much more strongly, and they kind of are the ones that had the biggest burden on the Trail of Tears. Now, this picture in the top right, that is a stereotypical picture, and I would say an incorrect picture of what the Cherokee looked like. This says, like full-on Native American, the headdress, the clothing, that is not fitting into the white man culture, right? I'm gonna advance slides real quick. This is actually an example of a Cherokee Indian. This is their chief. His name is John Ross. And how is he dressed? So the white man. That's right. Suit, bow tie, haircut, not a headdress, not buckskin clothing. The Cherokee actually fit into the white culture the most, down to, up to and including their clothing. So this is a stereotype, not what the Cherokee actually looked like. Reason that the Cherokee were really, reason that the white man wanted their land was, we already said it, what was it? Gold. Reason that the Cherokee wanted to stay on their land is because one, it was their homes, but two, they also were keenly aware that they had a valuable resource in gold. So really a hotly contested piece of land right here. You can see that it is in North Georgia. I'm going to show you another Georgia map here in a minute to show you exactly where it is. Devin, did you have a question? Mom's grandma, so you got some Cherokee blood. You then have some Cherokee blood, right? It filters from, let's see, your mother's grandma to your grandma, that's your great grandma, to your mother to you. So I don't know how the portions shake out, but through those 4 generations, you yourself have some Cherokee blood. All right, here. So we said that the Cherokees are probably the most civilized. They've been recognized as a separate nation in a previous treaty. They were living on the land that they were supposed to live in. Okay, they weren't fighting over it. They weren't sitting on someone else's plot of land. They were in the land that they were supposed to be on. They also had a very good understanding of American law. Just like they dressed kind of like the white man, well, they attended white man schools. They had lawyers. And because of this, when they were told they had to leave their land, Indian Removal Act, they took their case to court. They actually chipped all the way up to the Supreme Court. What do you think Andrew Jackson thought of that? He's like, oh, shoot, this Indian tribe is using my court against me. So here's the actual case. Now, this is not something, if this was a government class, this would be a case to remember, probably to remember. You probably study it a little bit more in depth. Today, I'm just giving you just a little bit, just so you can try to understand the whole story here. 1832, the case is called Worcester versus Georgia. This is the man, Samuel Worcester. He's actually a missionary to the Cherokee. He brings this case forward on behalf of the Cherokee, basically. He says that they do not have to leave their lands because they are there legally. The Supreme Court fully agrees with Worcester. He says the state of Georgia has no right to kick them off their land. The federal government could do that, but not the state of Georgia. So, which is what was happening. The state of Georgia was trying to kick these Cherokee off their lands. But guess what? Jackson and the state of Georgia just flat out ignored the ruling. Here's a famous quote from Jackson. He says, John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it. John Marshall was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Basically saying the Supreme Court has made its decision. Okay, whatever. Let's see them try to enforce it. So what that really did, what did that do to the strength of the Supreme Court? Cut them off at the knees, right? If the president is not going to respect the court's decisions, what power does the court even have? They don't have a special police force. They don't have a militia. They don't have an army. They can't go out and enforce their decisions. So they wrote their decision, they put it into law, and the president flat out ignored it. So that is a pretty harmful precedent to set, the president ignoring the Supreme Court, but it's exactly what happens. Now, to kind of try to tidy up some loose ends, here's a little part of the story that gets pretty shady. 1835, a small group of Cherokee citizens, not including their president, their chief, not including their elected officials. It would be like if you guys in this room right here went to France and made an official treaty on behalf of the United States with France. Do you guys have any authority to go speak on behalf of the United States? No, you're not elected leaders. Now, you're people and you matter and all that fluffy stuff, but you're not elected leaders. You can't go to France and start speaking on behalf of the United States. This is basically what happened. A small group of Cherokee, not their official leaders, met with 2 representatives from the United States, and in a secret meeting behind closed doors, basically they signed a document that says this, I'll read it to you. The Cherokee Nation hereby cedes and relinquishes to the United States all land owned, claimed, or possessed by them east of the Mississippi River. 20 Cherokee citizens signed away all the Cherokee lands on behalf of the Cherokee Nation. And what do you think Andrew Jackson did? Got it right here. You guys signed this. The Cherokee Nation signed this. It's legal now. Was it legal? Really debatable, right? But you and I could be like, their president didn't sign it. It's not a real agreement. But Andrew Jackson held it up as a real agreement. So that's where the history starts to get a little shady. This small group of people, what do you think was the benefit for them? Yeah, they got some compensation, all right? This small group of traitors to the Cherokee Nation, they got some compensation. Here's what I wondered. I don't know for sure, right? Maybe you could track the heritage throughout some history and documents and such like that. But I wonder if any of their grandmas had to make the walk. I wonder if any of their babies had to make the walk. I wonder if any of their cousins or extended kin had to walk the Trail of Tears. Basically, they had just signed a death warrant to their people because of this. I wonder if it really impacted their families because they signed this treaty that was really harmful to their whole country, their whole nation. It's called the Treaty of New Echota because this is New Echota. This is Georgia, North Georgia. Alma, obviously, right about here. New Echota, North Georgia. You could go visit it today. Actually, Mr. Mosley grew up pretty close to it. I personally haven't visited, but I know Mr. Mosley lived pretty near it. He's visited. The way they have it set up today is basically like a museum. It was the capital of Cherokee Nation. So much like Washington, D.C. is our capital, New Echota is the capital of the Cherokee Nation. And they have it set up kind of like it was back in the 1830s with houses and a courthouse and postmaster office, all that kind of stuff. So you could go visit New Echota today, historical marker there, talking about it being the Cherokee National Capital. Obviously, the treaty was signed in New Echota. Of course, it's kind of a bogus treaty based off of everything I just said. Well, in the end, 1838, okay, 1830 is when the Removal Act was signed. How many years later are we at? 8 years later. Okay, so the Cherokee resisted for a long time. This did not happen overnight. But 1838, what happened is very similar to the way your class started today. What was the first thing I said?
Come on, go.
Pack your stuff. You got 10 seconds. Let's go. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now, 10 seconds. Obviously, that was just for our little class. But basically, the United States Army, the hat I'm wearing, comes in and at gunpoint, at sword point, says, "Pack up. Let's go. You out. Like we are officially removing you from your lands. You have waited so long. You have resisted for so long. It's time to go." And I'll tell you, I am not proud of this part of the Army's history. Right? I am presently in the United States Army, the Georgia National Guard. This is not some foreign, later piece of U.S. history. This is not some army that's different than the Army of today. This is the United States Army. I'm not proud of this part of our history. I'm not proud that the Army, the same uniform that I wear today, was used to round up these Indians and kick them off their lands. So it goes to show you that sometimes our own American history is a little bit messy. It's not nice and warm and fuzzy and make you feel good, but we're not going to run away from those portions of our history. We're going to talk about them, hopefully so we remember them and don't repeat them. So, Jay, what's your question? What happened?
Okay, I got the feeling.
Okay, let's go.
You sound like y'all wear that.
Oh, yeah, well, when I say the same uniform, I mean lineage-wise, the same uniform. I don't wear the exact same uniform, but the United States Army, right? The United States Army. So what happened was, at this point, the amount of Cherokees that were still resisting, still holding out was about 16,000. Grandmas and grandpas, infants and newborns, and everything in between. About 16,000 Cherokees, they were first moved to holding camps. Once they're all gathered up in the holding camps, they set out on this so-called Trail of Tears all the way to Oklahoma to their new homes. So that trek, that walk was about 800 miles. Along the walk, about a fourth of them, 25% of them died. So about 16,000 started, about 4,000 of them died along the way. Brutal conditions. It was winter time. There's disease. There's cold. There's starvation. The harsh weather conditions. In total, about 4,000 people died, and it was mostly the old and the young. So think of it like this: this people group, the Cherokee, they basically lost their ancestry, their eldership, and they lost their future and their babies. They lost both sides of their history and it was the people in the middle that had to try to build their people back up. Kind of a sad way to think of it. Question?
Wait, so the people that signed the thing, they didn't get more like special privilege?
I don't know every little bit about all 20 of those people, but I know that there was benefits to them. Did they know that they signed a death warrant for their people? I don't know, not inside their brains, but there's almost kind of like their Judas moment, kind of like betraying Jesus. Judas betrayed Jesus. They're kind of the Judases of their Indian tribe because they sold them out.
And you think they get like escorted there?
Those 20, maybe they would get escorted there? Yeah, I don't know. You make me curious, though. I kind of want to research that a little bit more. So, I can show you I can show you bunches of pictures. There's no photography of the actual march because cameras hadn't been invented just yet. But this is a lady, an elder who made the march, and she got her photograph taken, many years later once cameras had been invented. Here's a little sad part, little side story. Along the way, every time they passed a town, every time they passed, a built-up town, a lot of white people would come out and just view them almost like as a spectator sport. Hoot and holler, wave them along, almost like they're just watching a parade. Total lack of care for the human condition, total lack of empathy for what's going on. Definitely not trying to stop it. It almost became like a spectator sport, like the white people watching the native people go through their suffering. That's pretty sad. That's a pretty low point in human history. Pretty sad thing that we did to each other during this time period. So, the winter of 1838 to 1839. Again, no photography, but this is a painting that kind of illustrates what it might have been like. Let's try to see a couple things here. What's something that stands out to you?
The soldiers.
The soldiers. What do the soldiers have going on for them?
Making sure
Horses.
Okay, so their job is that they're making sure. What was that?
Horses.
Soldiers are on horseback. Soldiers didn't have to make the walk. I bet the soldiers had enough food, enough clothes. They probably had tents for sleeping, and notably, they are on horses. Okay, so that's the soldiers. What else do we see?
There's
Oh,
some
wait, the
light.
soldiers went with them?
Well, the soldiers enforced them along the way. Just like I was doing. Hurry up, let's go. So they had to have, there were soldiers forcing them along the way. Andrea?
Are those soldiers as well in those wagons?
Soldiers in the wagons. Right here, that actually is a couple of Native Americans. So, maybe not everyone had to walk every single step.
They're carrying stuff on their back.
And they are, so this guy, he's carrying a lot of stuff, right? The weight of his world. I do want to point out there's a few wagons, but by and large, it was walking. Brandon, question? Thought? Okay, so that might be they're walking through that, a town, and people are coming out for just to view them as a spectator sport.
You said they had slaves.
The Indians were slave owners. That's a good point.
Did they bring them?
That's a fair question. I don't quite have that answer. You make me curious. I want to know more. This might be representing one of the Indian slaves who's coming along with them. What's that, Brandon?
I was about to say, because there's looks like there's a slip right there.
Yeah, black men. I'll point out one more thing. We kind of see all ages. So we have adults and, of course, we have children. Here's another picture, kind of a different perspective. What stands out to you about this picture?
The dude on the left falling.
Dude on the falling? Is he falling?
No, he's dead.
Yeah, I think that represents how they would
The dude taking a selfie, he's crying.
taking a selfie. Where?
The one in the front right here.
I think that's grandma crying. I think that represents the elderly ladies who cry along the way. Yeah, okay, so here's a man, someone who passed away, just being buried right alongside of the trail. Yep. You have an infant being carried. That infant can't fend for itself.
Were there babies born during this? Like they gave birth?
If there were pregnant women and it lasted 4, 5, 6 months long, yeah, I don't know that for a fact, but that is a reasonable guess.
Dead body, I think they're like, I don't know.
Yeah, he's wrapped in swaddling clothing, kind of grave clothes, if you will. So the Trail of Tears still exists today. Portions of the trail are actually well kept. I'm going to show you a picture here in just a second. And, because of such, there might be marked graves or even unmarked graves along the way. This is the beginning of the nickname, the Trail of Tears, for all the sadness that happened alongside it. What else you got?
Wait, so that trail is still here till this day?
I'm going to show you a picture here in just a second.
Okay, like you
That's
mean
right.
the trail itself, not the people.
What's happening on this side over here?
Left
Looking through
to
the
right.
side of the tree.
Right here?
Hey,
Finna do this right now.
I guess I can't quite tell what's going on there.
Finna beat the
Rangers
Trying to
Raiders.
get
Trying to get away. Do we see any soldiers in this picture?
No, actually, yeah.
Yeah.
And what's he doing?
They're enforcing to go.
He's on a
Okay,
horse.
and what's he riding on?
A horse.
Again, soldiers on horseback. One more picture showing you the harsh conditions of the winter time. You guys are kind of as into this as I am. I appreciate the conversation here. Obviously, we have a sick and maybe dying person. You know, when you're tired and you fell before you that fell out, you might just fall into the snowbank and never be seen again. And again, yet again, we have a soldier on horseback, so that's a pretty common theme. Devin, to your question, this is a portion of the Trail of Tears. Now, the trail was not one single path, okay? It wasn't just one super highway. There were many branches of the trail, but this is a portion of the trail that many thousands of people walked along. And you can see, obviously, it's still cut through the earth. It's still a trail. There may be bodies buried alongside it. I don't know for a fact, just based off of this picture. But here's a point I want to make. Yes, maybe some ghostly figures. Here's a point I want to make. Let's say the sun's going down. It's coming nighttime. It's time to make camp. Not exactly at a roadside motel, right? It's not exactly like there's warm creature comforts just waiting for you.
Did they ever go to sleep?
They would go to sleep. I mean, humans have to sleep, but the conditions of the march were certainly very rough. Very rough. Jasmine said they get attacked by wild animals. I don't know any particular instances, but that's reasonable, right? They're cutting through. So let me finish a couple thoughts. I'll let you guys ask any questions you have at the end. This painful march is called the Trail of Tears. I think I've made that point. You guys hardly experienced a Trail of Tears, but I hope you'll remember our little 10-minute walk. I hope you'll remember that just like you had a little bit of difficulty, it gives you some empathy for these people who had a lot of difficulty. The Cherokee left their true home, and then they arrived at a brand new place, just like we came to this room, and it is their home. And I already said, without much of their past, that's the elderly, without much of their future, that would be their youngins, if you will, because they didn't have any, because they were not strong enough to survive.
And well, if you go back to that picture, see it right there, that woman's actually looks like holding a dead woman. That baby.
Yeah, again, all these pictures, all these representations, you could pick out a lot of details. I appreciate you guys leaning
Did they
into
take
that.
blankets for the babies? Because I'm pretty sure they'll die in the cold.
It was a hard time. There's not a lot of fairness going on for sure. Jazz, question?
Hunting wild, like how they got food and they.
So, humans require basic provisions. Anytime that there's, say, a prisoner of war camp, you got to feed people at least a little to keep them alive. So I would guess that the Army provided some very basic provisions. But Jazz said, what about hunting? Yeah, if they wanted some real fresh meat or they needed to supplement their diet, if they had the ability to have those weapons, and I'll be honest, I'm not quite sure about that. Maybe the Army took their weapons away. But yeah, survival, classic survival situation. Those who were strong enough to survive did. Many who were weak or frail or injured didn't. Let me move on to the end here. I know you guys still have some questions. This shows the various paths they took. So like I said, it wasn't just one single path. I did say earlier, some of the other, look at what we got here. Chickasha, Choctaw, Seminoles, Creek, and then it's the Cherokee in North Georgia. Some of these groups, like I said, saw the writing on the walls. They may not have liked it, but they said, all right, the federal government's going to come for us eventually. We'll just leave. Seminoles, 1832, got on their way. Choctaw, 1830, they're the first ones out the door, got on their way. Chickasha, 32, Creek, 32. But remember, it was the Cherokee that held out the longest, and they were the ones that got forced marched with the harshest conditions because they were the most resistant to the movement. Many people in government, let me give you a little point of hope here. Many people in government did recognize this was wrong. Andrew Jackson and his followers may have been harsh and racist, and they implemented these policies against the Native Americans. But many people in government were aware this is not right. This is not how you should treat fellow human beings. Among them, Davy Crockett, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and at this point, it is former President John Quincy Adams. Anybody know the name Davy Crockett? What's he famous for? My third block said the coonskin hat, right? He wears the raccoon hat. Do you know where he fought, though? What he is most famous for? We got some good teachers.
Fighting a raccoon.
Yeah, he's famous for fight. Brandon, do you know?
I would say that
the little church-looking thing. Yeah, he's famous for fighting at the Alamo. You guys heard that word before in Texas? Well, just a little bit on Davy Crockett. Okay, it's kind of a side story. You guys know I like to tell you side stories. He's kind of a frontiersman. A lot of times Davy Crockett, Daniel Boone, they're said in the same way, right? So the coonskin hat, the leather clothing, he's on the frontier. Legend is that he killed a bear with his bare hands. I don't know if you choose to believe that or not.
Oh, yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah, I was there.
Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier. It's a Disney movie too. I don't know how accurate the Disney movie is, but Davy Crockett starts off as a frontiersman. He becomes a congressman from Tennessee. And it's during that time while he's a congressman, he's a lawmaker, he casts his vote in Congress, he has a voice in Congress. He stands up for the Indians. He says, this is not right. We should not displace these people from their lands. He was actually friends with Andrew Jackson because he served alongside him in a couple of military campaigns. So he was like, General Jackson, remember when we used to fight together? This is not the right way to treat these Indians. He tried. Davy Crockett really tried to stand up for the Indians. But in the end, his voice was not heard, or his power was not enough that he wasn't able to change the situation. So what he said, what takes him to the Alamo, is basically this. He says, forget this. I'm not running for Congress again. Forget all of y'all. I'm going to Texas to fight for the Republic of Texas. Okay, I'm going to the Alamo to fight for Texas. So he actually leaves the American government. This is Davy Crockett right there without his hat. He leaves Congress in order to go fight for Texas. Unfortunately, he dies at the Alamo. I'll tell you that story some other day. That's Davy Crockett. Ralph Waldo Emerson, he's a famous author. He uses his writing to help the Indians. John Quincy Adams, he's the former president, but unfortunately, even his voice is not loud enough, not strong enough to be able to help the Indians out. All that to say, there are people out there who were speaking on behalf of the Indians. Okay, not the whole country was trying to run these people off of their lands. There are some people who recognize that we need to help the marginalized. Here's my big take. Here's the big legacy, young people. And I give you guys these lessons sometimes because you know what? You're going to be in Congress someday. You're going to put me in a nursing home. Your generation is going to lead my kids and grandkids. So Jasmine's like, whoa. I need you guys to be ready, to be educated, to be the leaders in this country. Here's the big take. Here's the finish on the Trail of Tears. We can't just ignore this story. Even though it makes us uncomfortable, we can't look away. We got to take it head on because of the lessons of it. Here's the lesson. The group that was in power gained. The group that was the ruling class, presidency, elected to Congress, they were in power, they gained more power. The group that was cut out of power, the group that was oppressed and marginalized, they lost. Those in power stayed in power. Those not in power got stomped on. That is not okay. We have to remember the Trail of Tears to avoid repeating the mistakes of the Trail of Tears in the future. So I hope I've given you a bit of a formative experience. I hope I've given you something to remember, something to think about, so that your generation will be able to make decisions to not lead to this type of oppression in the future.
When they all go to sleep, and like the soldiers go to sleep, no one tried to
I think they took some.
There'd definitely be guards. There'd definitely be, protection. Jasmine brought up hunting. I bet that these Indians did not have many weapons available to them. Not firearms.
Oh, grab it by his neck.
All right, so here's how we're going to round it out. I'm going to show you this video. It's going to say a lot of the same things I just said. Maybe it'll say it a little bit better. It's going to show you a couple pictures and videos of the trails as well. So a couple of the questions you've been having, maybe it'll answer it in these next couple of minutes. When this video is done, we will go to the bathroom and return to our home where we will continue our conversation a little bit. So lean into this video. Heads up, please.
Shut up.
The various Indian tribes that were present in the United States were recognized as separate independent nations in the Constitution itself. So going back to the founding of the country, they were recognized as separate nations. They were not subject to state law. Treaties could not be made with states. They had to be made with the federal government. This was government-government relation, nation to nation, just like the U.S. is any other country. So they kept passing repeated laws, trying to take the land away from the Cherokee. They were not recognized as legal, but weren't Knox Jackson was president. He supported the removal of the Indians. The Cherokee argued to the Supreme Court. They always tried to follow the legal procedure. Indians Americans, they took 2 cases to the Supreme Court that ruled that they could not be removed, they had the right to the land, but the president ignored the Supreme Court and ordered the Army to forcibly remove the Cherokee from all of the land. Some leaders of the Cherokee signed the Treaty of Minnesota, which was validated by the President and Congress, which gave away the rest of the remaining lands in the state. Others didn't agree with that, didn't want to accept it. But even the ones who didn't want to accept it, once the president had ordered the removal, let everyone know they should not violently resist, they should go along when the time came. In addition to the Army, Georgia mobilized its militia and sent them in to assist with the removal, which is one of the reasons that the leaders encouraged people not to resist. There's a fear that if people did start resisting, it'd be a mass slaughter. The process of the removal became known as the Trail of Tears. The Army and the militias literally went house to house on the Cherokee Nation, grabbing everyone who was there and marching them away. Generally, they weren't even given time to pack bags. They were just taken. They were marched to gathering camps. There were several throughout the state, kept there until everyone in the area was gathered up, and then they would move to major transportation centers. And then primarily by overland.
Another portion of the trail.
Oklahoma. They called this the Trail of Tears because of all the deaths and all the suffering that happened. There were approximately 18,000 Cherokees that were gathered up and removed during the Trail of Tears, and at least 4,000 of them died on the trip to Oklahoma from Georgia and North Carolina. It still was a very significant moment in their history, and it's hard for some of you to speak of even after all this time.
All right, so this kind of concludes our conversation on the Trail of Tears as it relates to our activity. Let's, this time I won't force you to rush. Let's go ahead and go to our bathroom like normal, and then return to my room, 1206, and we'll continue.
I wonder if those people were asking.
You were really into that room, Jake. We appreciate it.
What's up, Screen?
Lady, if you'll just bring that rope back to my
Chad,
room,
so today
please.
we're gonna be, handing her over to White Man. And then-
Hello.
Say she don't got clock in, but I'm working on it.